And Bob?
Thank you. Mike, I've got 2 children that are through school, and I can assure you that Mama isn't letting the subsidies end, because she knows in this economy they still need a little bit of help, apparently. Look, there is no free market for energy. There's not today, and there never has been. A report by the International Energy Administration that came out recently concluded that across the globe, the fossil fuel industry received some $523 billion in subsidies in 2011 alone, more than 6 times that which was given across the globe for renewable energies. There was a Yale study that came out recently that said that since 1918, subsidies to oil and gas have been 14 times higher than those for renewable fuels. It's great for people up here to say, you know, we've got to have a free market. Well, you got to deal with the fact that we haven't had a free market. And if you want to create competition and innovation, if you want to deal with the environmental, energy, and economic issues associated with the monopoly that oil currently has on our liquid transportation fuels, you have to deal with the reality that we have been underwriting energy resources disproportionately for a very long time. Now look, I represent an industry that has been subsidized and is a tremendous success because of the investment that was made. But that incentive also ended. Our industry today is blended in 10% of the nation's gasoline. We are virtually in every single gallon of gasoline across the country. Our industry is responsible for some 400,000 jobs as a consequence of the investment that was made in this fledgling industry. We are less expensive than gasoline today and are saving consumers money as a result, and none of that would have happened were it not for the fact that an incentive was put in place, not to ethanol producers, but to the refiners and gasoline marketers that would use our fuel to create a marketplace. It allowed us to grow and be competitive. But in 2011, in recognition of the fact that the marketplace had changed, in recognition of the fact that our industry had matured and grown and was far more efficient, we willingly gave up our tax incentive. I challenged the petroleum industry at the time to give up theirs. And curiously, they're still fighting to their dying breath to maintain their tax incentives and preferences and everything else. So I think we need to level the playing field. I think we need to recognize that for a very long time we have created an infrastructure and a marketplace and the technologies for petroleum. But if we want to have diversity, if we want to address some of the environmental consequences of that reliance on petroleum, if we want to make ourselves somewhat more energy secure, we have to have some programs that will allow that to occur in a market that right now is saying it's all about petroleum. Everybody is, all of the above, including me. Our customers are the petroleum industry, and I'm glad to see the growth in petroleum domestically. It's a good thing for our nation, but we ought not pursue that without looking at what we'll continue to need to do in order to continue to diversify our fuel supplies.
Okay, where I'd like to start, if it's acceptable, is to go right back to first principles and jump off really with what Bob just said. Is he said there is no free market in energy. And you hear this a lot, and sometimes it is accompanied with, and there can't be. You know, we hear this with a lot of other industries as well. So if I could ask the free marketeers really just start with, can there be a free market realistically, and could you paint a more detailed picture of what that would actually look like? Because we've heard here that would be a terrible thing for the United States. I presume you disagree.
Yeah, absolutely. Steve, you want to hit it? Or? I'll just take a swing at that. Look, what I favor is, let me step back a minute. The greatest economist of the last 100 years is Milton Friedman, no question about it. And one of Milton Friedman's tenets of economics is that you never fight a subsidy with a subsidy. right? And so to the extent that Bob is right, that there are, and I'm not an expert on this, so I don't know, you're more an expert on this than I am, Tom, about, you know, the relative subsidies to one form of energy production over another. But if we can agree on what those subsidies are, I am right behind you, Bob, all the way that we should get rid of those subsidies for oil and gas. The oil and gas industry doesn't need subsidies. They're doing really, really well right now. Now, we might disagree about whether some of the tax provisions of the code are subsidies or not, and we could have that argument. But what I believe, we should just get rid of all subsidies, save taxpayer money. We don't have to be, you know, we're borrowing $1 trillion a year. We can't afford to continue to do this. And let the best technology win. That's the most cost efficient.
Well, that's really the answer too. I mean, if you look at the energy mix today, even with the increases in wind and solar and other renewables, 82% is still provided by 3 sources: coal, petroleum, and natural gas. You can level the playing field all you want, but if the technologies or the energy sources are less efficient, less reliable, and they don't work as well, you can't subsidize those changes. You have to have products that are superior to the product you're trying to replace. And I don't think you will ever see in the very near future, certainly not in the long distance future, these other sources, geothermal, solar, wind, biomass, none of these sources are going to come close to meeting that gap between 82% and 9.3%, which, including hydro, is all we're getting for those 5 or 6 sources.
The sort of follow-up to that, I suppose, is when Bob spoke, I noticed, compared to when you spoke, he seemed to have aims in mind, so particular aims. He said, well, we need to create a market that looks like this, that does this. Is that something that the federal government should be doing with the tax code? And if it isn't, why isn't it?
Well, it isn't, because the market is a better place to do that. It's far superior. It yields better results for the supposed end consumer. But you know, at the end of the day, we need to decide how and what role the federal government is going to play in this and everything else. That's why we have these debates in town. But I always go back to the point that there's a lot of things that the feds are involved in that they aren't doing particularly well. And at some point down way back when, they decided to enter this ball game, and we've been sort of dealing with the consequences ever since. So I think it can be unwound. I think it has to be unwound. And as Steve said, we need to figure out, sort of come together in terms of defining what these subsidies are, be on the same place with respect to that issue, answer that question, and then I'm for eliminating them all for every energy source.
And one of the things I find interesting, I think this research comes from the Department of Energy and has been advertised by your group, Tom, but you know, when you hear all this talk about this industry gets so much subsidy and this industry gets so much subsidy, and oil and gas and coal and you know, hydro and so on, one of the things you have to look at is how much energy is being produced by that industry. So if you just looked at overall levels of subsidy, you may think oil and gas was the most subsidized industry, but they produce, you know, 10, 15, 20 times more energy than do these other sources. So, for example, when you compare the subsidy that oil and gas gets versus solar and wind, I mean, you know these numbers, it's right, Tom, it's like 100 times greater per kilowatt of electricity or unit of fuel that's produced that goes to the wind and solar industry, for example, than goes to oil and gas. And that should be the relative comparison.
Yeah, the BTU bang for your buck.
Right. But Charles, there is absolutely going to be an issue, though, of defining what exactly these subsidies are, because I actually had an opportunity to look quickly at the report, not read through every bit of it that you cited earlier that was released today, and accelerated percentage depletion allowance was not on that list. The enhanced oil recovery tax incentives, not on that list. Expensing for intangible drilling, not on that list. The credit for marginal wells, not on that list. Other incentives that the tax code allows the oil industry that the renewable industry doesn't have access to, like the access to MLPs, master limited partnerships, only for extraction industries, not for renewables, not on your list. There was one small tax incentive that you did include for oil and gas. Most of them were coal-related. So you have to have a meaningful conversation. Sure. And the fact of the matter is, there is a lot of incentives that are buried in the tax code with no sunset that absolutely benefit the oil and gas industry, and today dictate that much of the energy investment dollar go toward tight oil extraction and deep water drilling, and not towards renewable fuels. You have to have a level playing field before you can even begin to talk about a free market.
Well, with respect to that, the subsidies that the renewable industry gets in those same categories, which admittedly aren't as great, are also not included in there. That is a discussion, a deeper discussion about reforming the tax code, which I'm also happy to have. But you have to lump R&D tax credits for pharmaceuticals and some other things that are in the tax code that are remarkably similar to those types of deductions that most businesses get. So we can set that aside. With respect to the MLPs, one second. With respect to the MLPs, I'll put those on the table for renewables right now. If, for example, the wind industry is willing to drop the production tax credit, because that is the difference between giving someone a credit for producing something in the marketplace for the sheer nature of it, or in the case of ethanol, mandating that the market be required to have a certain percentage of it in its commerce, versus tax credits and business deductions. But that is a good point, and we would also welcome a vigorous debate about reforming the tax code, because that is equally critical in terms of getting our economy back on track.
I think getting into the tax code is, I mean, that's one of the fundamental debates around town right now, is what is a subsidy and what's not. To put things in proper perspective, if you're talking about a massive kind of leveling the playing field kind of tax package, that hasn't happened since Haley's Comet. I mean, it was a long time ago, and now maybe with a retiring chairman that doesn't have to fundraise and is free to do what he wants to do on the finance committee, and you know, a commitment from Boehner that we're going to look at a massive tax bill, maybe something happens. But I do think that you can move back towards a free market approach on energy, but part of that has to be moving towards a technology neutral type of incentive structure in terms of subsidies and what kind of technologies we're looking at, where they're evaluated for, you're talking about energy density. Well, we've put hundreds of millions of dollars into these large-scale solar plants, but a fraction of that has gone into battery research. That's where you need to put the money so that you can actually concentrate it and hold it. But we're not doing that. You're seeing the amount of money that's out there, 75% of the subsidies that are out there for renewable fuels are going to deployment. A fraction of that is going to R&D. So I think as we look at moving away and trying to find ways of getting to a flatter structure, you've got to look at how we're investing right now. And with respect to IDCs, this is one of those things where the policy world up in D.C. defies logic and gravity. Because in one breath, you have one person saying, well, we need to put more money into supporting and subsidizing the purchase of natural gas vehicles. And in the next breath, they're saying we should do away with IDCs, which will destroy about 30% of the investment into producing natural gas. It's the same people that are saying the same things, and it's probably within the same sentence. And so I think that, you know, the discussions up here have to go towards how are we deploying our resources, because they're finite.